I gripped my phone so hard my knuckles turned white, watching in disbelief as my family's group chat exploded with desperate messages begging for my financial help. The same family who had spent decades relegating me to the rickety card table, in the corner at every holiday dinner, while my siblings enjoyed their reserved spots at the main table with the real adults. The irony was almost laughable as I scrolled through their panicked texts about the family business collapse, each one suddenly treating me like I mattered after years of making it abundantly clear that I was merely an afterthought, tolerated, but never truly included. If this situation sounds familiar, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. And make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's video about family betrayal will have you questioning everything you thought you knew about loyalty. The first hint that something was wrong came on a Tuesday evening in late September. I was in my downtown office, reviewing quarterly projections with my team. The city lights glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows as we finalized our presentation for tomorrow's investor meeting. My phone vibrated against the conference table. My mother's name flashed on the screen. I frowned. We hadn't spoken in nearly 3 months, not since the awkward birthday dinner where my father had spent the entire evening discussing my brother Nathan's latest business venture, while barely acknowledging my recent promotion to CFO at one of the city's fastest-growing tech firms. "Sorry," I murmured to my team, silencing the call. "Let's continue." The phone buzzed again immediately, then a third time. By the fourth consecutive call, I excused myself. "I need to take this," I said, stepping into the hallway. "Mom? Is everything okay? I'm in the middle of a meeting." There was a pause, followed by a shaky inhale. My mother was many things, but emotionally demonstrative wasn't one of them. "Jacob, I wouldn't call if it wasn't important. It's about the family business. It's gone under." I leaned against the wall, processing her words. Mitchell Family Enterprises had been my father's pride and joy for over 40 years. The business that had paid for our childhood home, my siblings' Ivy League educations while I cobbled together scholarships and loans for state school, the source of my father's identity in the community. "What do you mean gone under?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "The bank called in the loans yesterday. There's nothing left." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Your father doesn't want anyone to know yet." "What about the assets? The equipment? The properties? Mortgaged or leveraged years ago?" She paused. "Jacob, your father's not handling this well. I'm worried about him." A familiar weight settled on my shoulders, the expectation that despite being the least valued family member, I would somehow rise to the occasion in a crisis. "What about Nathan and Olivia?" I asked. Nathan had joined the family business straight, out of his business program, taking the VP role I had once hoped might be mine. Olivia, the eldest and unquestionable favorite, had married into a wealthy family and lived 3 states away. "Nathan's in this as deep as your father," my mother replied, her voice tinged with unfamiliar desperation. "And Olivia, well, you know how things are with her husband's family. They can't get involved in something like this. Something like this. A failure. A scandal. Something beneath their carefully maintained image." "So you're calling me?" I said flatly. "You've always been good with money, Jacob." The compliment sounded strange coming from her. I couldn't recall the last time either of my parents had acknowledged my financial acumen. "And with your position at that company, Horizon Tech," I supplied the name she had never bothered to remember. "Yes, that one. You understand these things. We need your help figuring out what to do next." My colleague Aiden poked his head out of the conference room, raising his eyebrows questioningly. I nodded that I'd be right there. "Mom, I need to get back to my meeting. More important than your family?" The familiar guilt tactic slipped out automatically. I bit back the retort that rose to my lips, that my family had rarely treated me as important, so why should their problems take precedence? Instead, I said simply, "I'll call you back in 2 hours." Your father wants to meet. In person. Her voice had an edge now. We're thinking dinner on Thursday. The whole family will be there. The whole family. Suddenly I was needed at the main table. I'll check my calendar, I replied, already knowing I would rearrange whatever necessary to be there. Despite everything, some part of me still craved their approval. Don't tell anyone about this, she added urgently. Not even Rebecca. My wife of 3 years, who had witnessed firsthand my family's pattern of overlooking me. I gripped my phone so hard my knuckles turned white, watching in disbelief as my family's group chat exploded with desperate messages begging for my financial help. The same family who had spent decades relegating me to the rickety card table, in the corner at every holiday dinner, while my siblings enjoyed their reserved spots at the main table with the real adults. The irony was almost laughable as I scrolled through their panicked texts about the family business collapse, each one suddenly treating me like I mattered after years of making it abundantly clear that I was merely an afterthought, tolerated, but never truly included. If this situation sounds familiar, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. And make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's video about family betrayal will have you questioning everything you thought you knew about loyalty. The first hint that something was wrong came on a Tuesday evening in late September. I was, in my downtown office, reviewing quarterly projections with my team. The city lights glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows as we finalized our presentation for tomorrow's investor meeting. My phone vibrated against the conference table. My mother's name flashed on the screen. I frowned. We hadn't spoken. In nearly 3 months. Not since the awkward birthday dinner where my father had spent the entire evening discussing my brother Nathan's latest business venture, while barely acknowledging my recent promotion to CFO at one of the city's fastest-growing tech firms. Sorry, I murmured to my team, silencing the call. Let's continue. The phone buzzed again immediately, then a third time. By the fourth consecutive call, I excused myself. I need to take this, I said, stepping into the hallway. Mom? Is everything okay? I'm in the middle of a meeting. There was a pause, followed by a shaky inhale. My mother was many things, but emotionally demonstrative wasn't one of them. Jacob, I wouldn't call if it wasn't important. It's about the family business. It's gone under. I leaned against the wall, processing her words. Mitchell Family Enterprises had been my father's pride and joy for over 40 years, the business that had paid for our childhood home, my siblings' Ivy League educations while I cobbled together scholarships and loans for state school, the source of my father's identity in the community. What do you mean gone under? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. The bank called in the loans yesterday. There's nothing left. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Your father doesn't want anyone to know yet. What about the assets? The equipment? The properties? Mortgaged or leveraged years ago. She paused. Jacob, your father's not handling this well. I'm worried about him. A familiar weight settled on my shoulders. The expectation that despite being the least valued family member, I would somehow rise to the occasion in a crisis. What about Nathan and Olivia? I asked. Nathan had joined the family business straight, out of his business program, taking the VP role I had once hoped might be mine. Olivia, the eldest and unquestionable favorite, had married into a wealthy family and lived 3 states away. Nathan's in this as deep as your father, my mother replied, her voice tinged with unfamiliar desperation. And Olivia, well, you know how things are with her husband's family. They can't get involved in something like this. Something like this. A failure. A scandal. Something beneath their carefully maintained image. So, you're calling me, I said flatly. You've always been good with money, Jacob. The compliment sounded strange coming from her. I couldn't recall the last time either of my parents had acknowledged my financial acumen. And with your position at that company, Horizon Tech, I supplied the name she had never bothered to remember. Yes, that one. You understand these things. We need your help figuring out what to do next. My colleague Aidan poked his head out of the conference room, raising his eyebrows questioningly. I nodded that I'd be right there. Mom, I need to get back to my meeting. More important than your family? The familiar guilt tactic slipped out automatically. I bit back the retort that rose to my lips, that my family had rarely treated me as important, so why should their problems take precedence? Instead, I said simply, I'll call you back in 2 hours. Your father wants to meet. In person. Her voice had an edge now. We're thinking dinner on Thursday. The whole family will be there. The whole family. Suddenly I was needed at the main table. I'll check my calendar, I replied, already knowing I would rearrange whatever necessary to be there. Despite everything, some part of me still craved their approval. Don't tell anyone about this, she added urgently. Not even Rebecca. My wife of 3 years, who had witnessed firsthand my family's pattern of overlooking me. I ended the call without promising anything and stood in the hallway for a moment, memories washing over me. Christmases where my gifts were clearly afterthoughts. Family photos where I was positioned at the edge, easily cropped out. Graduations, where my achievements were mentioned in passing, if at all. Decades of subtle and not-so-subtle reminders that I was somehow less essential to the family narrative. And now, suddenly, I was necessary. Now, my expertise mattered. Now, they had found a use for the son they had spent a lifetime relegating to the periphery. I returned to the conference room, pushing aside thoughts of my family's sudden crisis. But beneath my professional composure, a complicated mix of emotions churned: satisfaction that they finally needed me, resentment that it had taken financial disaster to make them see my value, and an unwelcome twinge of concern for my father, whose identity had always been inseparable from his business. By the time our meeting concluded, I had made a decision. I would attend the family dinner, listen to what they had to say, and then decide, not based on decades of emotional debt they assumed I owed them, but on what made sense for my life now. The life I had built without their help or approval. As I gathered my things to head home, I wondered what Rebecca would say. She had been urging me for years to establish firmer boundaries with my family, to stop seeking validation from people who had shown repeatedly that they saw me as an accessory, rather than an essential part of their lives. The elevator descended to the lobby, and I nodded to the security guard as I exited the building. The September evening was pleasantly cool, the city humming with energy around me. This was my world now, far from the suburbs where I'd grown up feeling invisible. Here, my opinions were sought after, my expertise valued, my presence necessary. I walked to the parking garage. I realized Thursday's dinner would be the first time in my life that my family truly saw me. Not as the forgotten child, not as an afterthought, but as their potential savior. The realization brought no joy, only a heavy understanding that sometimes recognition comes far too late and at far too high a price. They want what? Rebecca stared at me across our kitchen island, a half-chopped bell pepper forgotten on the cutting board. The evening light streamed through our apartment windows, casting long shadows across the modern space we'd carefully designed together. Financial help, I repeated, loosening my tie. The family business is bankrupt, and apparently, I'm their last hope. Rebecca set down her knife and wiped her hands on a towel. In the 3 years we'd been married, she'd witnessed countless examples of my family's selective attention. The wedding where my father's toast mentioned Nathan's achievements more than our actual marriage. The holiday gatherings where my opinions were politely acknowledged, then swiftly dismissed. The way my mother always asked about my job as an afterthought, never remembering the details. And now they need the forgotten son, she said, a slight edge to her voice. Convenient. I poured myself a glass of water, the day's tension settling into my shoulders. Mom wants us at dinner on Thursday. The whole family will be there. Us? Rebecca raised an eyebrow. So I'm suddenly invited to the crisis meeting. Last Christmas, your mother introduced me to her bridge club as Jacob's wife because she couldn't remember my name. It was a slip, I said automatically, though we both knew it wasn't. Rebecca crossed her arms. Jacob, you know I'll support whatever you decide, but just be careful. They have a pattern of pulling you in just enough to use you, then pushing. You right back to that card table when they're done. The card table. It had started when I was 9, at Thanksgiving dinner. Not enough room at the main table, my mother had explained as she set up a small folding table in the corner. Just for this year. But somehow, year after year, even as cousins and Nathan's friends were accommodated at the expanded main table, I remained at my separate station. By the time I was in high school, it had become a family joke, my designated spot. Jacob and his card table, inseparable as always. No one seemed to notice, or care, how the physical separation mirrored my emotional distance from the family unit. I know their pattern, I said, joining Rebecca at the island. I'm going in with my eyes open. She studied my face. But part of you still wants their approval. It wasn't a question. I couldn't deny it, despite years of therapy and professional success. Some childish part of me still craved validation from the people who had spent a lifetime withholding it. I just want to hear what they have to say. Rebecca nodded, returning to her meal preparation. Just remember, you've built something good here. She gestured around our home, but we both knew she meant more than just the physical space. Don't let them make you feel small again. Thursday. Evening arrived with an unseasonable chill. I stood outside my parents' suburban home, the same house where I'd grown up feeling like an outsider. Rebecca squeezed my hand reassuringly before I rang the doorbell. My mother answered, her eyes darting past me to scan the street before ushering us in quickly. Thank you for coming, she said, the formal greeting sounding strange from a parent. She air-kissed my cheek, then Rebecca's, her perfume exactly the same as it had been throughout my childhood. The house looked unchanged, the formal living room that we were never allowed to use as children, the dining room with its heavy oak table that could easily seat 12, the family photos on the wall that somehow always featured Nathan and Olivia in prominent positions while I lingered at the edges. Everyone's in the den, my mother said, leading the way. The den had always been my father's domain, his leather chair positioned as a throne from which he dispensed approval and disappointment in uneven measures. As we entered, I took in the scene. My father, looking smaller somehow, hunched in his chair. Nathan pacing by the fireplace. Olivia and her husband Robert perched stiffly on the love seat. All heads turned toward us with expressions ranging from relief to barely concealed resentment. Jacob, my father nodded, not rising. Rebecca. Dad, I replied. Everyone. Nathan stepped forward first, offering a handshake that felt more like a business transaction than a brotherly greeting. At 39, 2 years my senior, he had always been the heir apparent to the family business. His path cleared and celebrated at every turn. Thanks for coming, he said, his voice tight. We weren't sure you would. You called 4 times, Mom sent 6 texts, and Olivia emailed me. I replied evenly. I got the message that it was important. Olivia didn't stand, merely inclined her head in acknowledgement. Jacob, Rebecca. At 41, she had perfected the art of polite dismissal, a skill inherited directly from our mother. We settled into the remaining seats, a worn love seat that had been relegated to the den when the living room was redecorated years ago. No, card table at least, though the hierarchy remained clear in the seating arrangements. My father cleared his throat. I suppose your mother told you about the business. She mentioned it's in trouble, I said carefully. Something about the bank, calling in loans. In trouble is putting it mildly, Nathan interjected, running a hand through his thinning hair. We're ruined, completely underwater. The bank is seizing everything corporate, and they're coming for personal assets next. I kept my expression neutral. How did it happen? My father and Nathan exchanged glances. Market downturn, my father said vaguely. Some investments that didn't pan out. The Monroe development, Nathan added. We put everything into it. Land acquisition, pre-construction, marketing. Then the environmental survey came back with issues we didn't anticipate. Protected wetlands, my father muttered. Who would have thought swampland would be worth protecting? I bit back a response about due diligence and proper site assessments. What's the exposure? $7 million in corporate debt, Nathan said flatly. Another $2 million in personal guarantees. Rebecca stiffened beside me. The numbers were staggering for a regional construction company. We've tried everything, my mother added. Second mortgages, liquidating assets, approaching our business, contacts for bridge loans. Nobody's willing to touch us. Which brings us to why you're here, my father said, fixing me with a direct gaze for perhaps the first time in years. We need your help, Jacob. Despite preparing myself for this moment, the bluntness of the request caught me off guard. Not, we'd like your advice, or we want your perspective. Just the naked admission, they needed me. More specifically, they needed my money. What exactly are you asking for? I kept my voice steady. We need capital to negotiate with the bank, Nathan jumped in. If we can offer a lump sum to settle a portion of the debt, they might restructure the rest. Give us breathing room to rebuild. How much? Another glance between my father and Nathan. $2 million, my father said finally. To start. Rebecca's hand found mine, squeezing tight. $2 million, a staggering sum, even with my success at Horizon Tech. It would mean liquidating investments, pulling from retirement accounts, possibly even taking a loan against our apartment. That's a significant amount, I said carefully. You're the only one who can help, Olivia spoke up for the first time. Robert and I would if we could, but with the twins' private school and the foundation commitments, her voice trailed off, the implication clear, their privileged lifestyle couldn't possibly be disrupted. We know it's a lot, my mother added quickly, but it would save the family legacy, the business your father built from nothing, the Mitchell name in this community, the Mitchell name, the legacy. These concepts had been wielded throughout my childhood as both carrot and stick, motivating Nathan's inclusion in the business while explaining why my interests in technology and finance were viewed as tangential to the family identity. I'd need to see the books, I said, neither agreeing nor refusing outright. Full financial disclosure, past 5 years of operations, all current debts, assets, everything. My father stiffened, his pride visibly wounded at the suggestion that his business dealings required scrutiny. This isn't some corporate takeover, Jacob. This is family. It's basic due diligence, I replied evenly. I can't make any decisions without understanding exactly what I'd be getting into. What you'd be getting into, Nathan repeated, a hint of his usual condescension creeping back. You make it sound like we're asking for an investment rather than help. Aren't you? I countered. $2 million isn't a small favor, Nathan. It's not borrowing a lawnmower. The room fell silent, the tension palpable. This direct pushback was unfamiliar territory in our family dynamic. Typically, I would have acquiesced, accepted whatever scraps of inclusion were offered, then retreated to my assigned peripheral position. I think what Jacob means, Rebecca interjected smoothly, is that he wants to help in the most effective way possible. That requires understanding the complete picture. My mother seized on this lifeline. Of course, we have nothing to hide. Nathan can compile everything you need, can't you, Nathan? Nathan's jaw tightened, but he nodded stiffly. I'll have it ready by the weekend. I'd like access to the company servers, I added, and interviews with the management team. If we're going to salvage anything, I need the unfiltered truth. Interviews? My father's voice rose slightly. These people have worked for me for decades. They're not going to be interrogated like criminals. Not interrogated, I clarified. Consulted. They may have insights that aren't reflected in the financial statements. Another uncomfortable silence fell. I sensed the growing realization around the room. I wasn't simply going to write a check and fade back into the background. If they wanted my help, it would come with active involvement, with visibility, with a voice that could no longer be dismissed to the kids' table. "Whatever you need," my mother said finally, casting a warning glance at my father. "We're grateful for any help you can provide." The conversation shifted to logistics, when I could review the files, which key personnel I should speak with, the timeline for bank negotiations. Throughout it all, I maintained a professional distance, treating the discussion like any other business meeting. Rebecca remained silent but supportive beside me, her presence an anchor against the swirling undercurrents of family history. As the evening wound down, I found myself alone with my father in the kitchen while the others gathered their coats. He stood by the window, staring out at the darkened backyard where a swing set, used primarily by Nathan's children during their infrequent visits, stood as a lonely sentinel. "I never thought it would come to this," he said quietly, not turning around. "Asking my son for a handout." "It's not a handout, Dad," I replied. "It's potentially a business transaction." He turned then, his expression a complex mixture of pride, resentment, and something that might have been regret. "Is that all it is to you? A business transaction?" The question hung in the air between us, weighted with decades of distance, of opportunities missed, of connections never formed. I thought of all the times I had waited for his approval, his interest, his acknowledgement that I too was part of the family legacy he valued so highly. "That depends," I said finally, "on whether you're asking for my help as a banker or as a son." Something flickered across his face, recognition perhaps of the chasm that had grown between us, a chasm largely of his own making. "You were always different," he said, as if that explained everything. "Nathan and Olivia, they fit into what I understood. You were a puzzle I never quite figured out." It wasn't an apology, not even close, but it was perhaps the most honest thing my father had ever said to me, an admission that his distance had stemmed at least partly from his own limitations rather than any failing on my part. "I'm not that complicated, Dad," I said quietly. "I just wanted a place at the actual table." Before he could respond, Rebecca appeared in the doorway. "We should head out if we want to beat traffic," she said, her intuition perfect as always, offering me an exit before the conversation could retreat to safer, more superficial ground. As we said our goodbyes, formal, restrained, nothing like the effusive hugs exchanged when Nathan or Olivia departed, my mother pressed a small photo album into my hands. "I found this while cleaning last week," she said. "Thought you might want to have it." In the car, as Rebecca drove us back toward the city, I opened the album to find childhood photos I'd never seen before. Me playing t-ball, winning a science fair, graduating elementary school. Images from a parallel universe where my achievements had been documented but never celebrated, preserved but never displayed alongside those of my siblings. "You okay?" Rebecca asked softly, glancing over. I closed the album, emotions too complex to untangle in that moment. "They never saw me," I said. "Not really. And now they're looking at me like I'm their salvation." "The question is," she replied, reaching for my hand, "what are you going to do about it?" As the suburbs gave way to city lights, I stared out at the changing landscape, thinking about card tables and family legacies, about invisibility and sudden, desperate visibility, about the power dynamics that had shifted seismically in a single evening, and the decisions that now lay before me. "I'm going to see the books," I said finally, "and then I'm going to decide, on my terms, not theirs, what happens next." The Mitchell Family Enterprises headquarters occupied a modest two-story building on the outskirts of town. The brick facade, once proudly emblazoned with the company logo my father had designed himself in 1981, now looked weathered and tired. Much like the man who had built the business from the ground up. I pulled into the nearly empty parking lot early Saturday morning, a time I'd deliberately chosen to minimize encounters with staff. Nathan's car was already there, his reserved parking spot. Nathan Mitchell, Executive Vice President. A lingering symbol of the hierarchy that had defined our family both professionally and personally. He was waiting in the conference room, surrounded by stacks of files and binders. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept much. "Morning," I said, setting down my laptop bag. Nathan nodded stiffly. "Coffee's fresh. I've pulled everything you asked for. Financial statements, tax returns, loan documentation, project files for the last 5 years." He gestured to the organized chaos on the table. "It's all here." "Digital copies?" He handed me a flash drive. "Everything's on here too." I stayed up half the night scanning the older documents. The admission of effort surprised me. Nathan had never been one to put himself out for my benefit. "Thanks," I said, taking the drive. "That helps." An awkward silence fell between us, brothers connected by blood but separated by decades of unequal treatment and unspoken resentments. In the harsh fluorescent light of the conference room, Nathan looked older than his 39 years, the weight of the company's collapse etched into the lines around his eyes. "Dad's pretty torn up," he said finally. "He's not sleeping. Mom says he just sits in his study staring at old photos of the early days." I nodded, unsure what response was expected. Sympathy? Reassurance? "It can't be easy," I offered. "You don't get it," Nathan said, a familiar edge creeping into his voice. "This isn't just a business to him. It's his life's work, his identity. If we lose this, I'm not sure he'll recover." The implication hung in the air. My father's well-being rested on my shoulders, on my willingness to step in with financial rescue. Another burden laid at the feet of the forgotten son, now suddenly essential. "I understand more than you think," I replied, keeping my voice level. "That's why I need to see exactly what we're dealing with. If I'm going to help, it has to be in a way that actually solves the problem, not just delays the inevitable." Nathan ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of our father that it was almost startling. "Just try to remember it's not just numbers on a page. It's our family. Our family." The phrase struck me as ironic. This sudden inclusion, this belated acknowledgement of my membership in the Mitchell clan, coming only when they needed something from me. "I'll keep that in mind," I said, turning to the files. "I'll need a few hours here. Then I'd like to speak with Diane from accounting and Jim from operations." Nathan hesitated. "They don't know how bad things are. Dad didn't want to worry the staff until we had a plan." "They probably know more than you think," I countered. "And I need unfiltered information. No coaching them beforehand." Another flash of the old Nathan, irritation at being directed by his younger brother, crossed his face, but he nodded reluctantly. "I'll set it up. Call me when you're ready for them." Once alone, I dove into the financial records, the familiar language of balance sheets and cash flow statements providing a comforting objectivity. Numbers didn't play favorites. Numbers didn't relegate anyone to a card table in the corner. 3 hours later, I had a comprehensive picture of Mitchell Family Enterprises' collapse, and it was even worse than they had admitted. The Monroe development wasn't the only problematic project. There had been a series of increasingly risky investments over the past 3 years, each designed to recoup losses from the previous venture. The company had been hemorrhaging money while maintaining a facade of prosperity. More troubling were the signs that my father and Nathan had been pulling personal funds from the business improperly, blurring the lines between corporate and personal finances in ways that would make any bankruptcy judge deeply suspicious. Whether from desperation or denial, they had been engaging in financial practices that bordered on fraudulent. I was making notes for further investigation when there was a soft knock at the door. Diane from accounting, a woman who had worked for my father since before I was born, entered hesitantly. "Jacob," she smiled, genuine warmth in her expression. "It's been too long. Nathan said you wanted to talk to me?" I stood, returning her smile. Diane had always been kind to me during my brief summer jobs at the company as a teenager, one of the few adults who had seemed to actually see me. "Thanks for making time on a Saturday." "Of course, anything for the Mitchell family." She settled into a chair, her expression growing more serious. "Though I have to say, things haven't been looking too good around here lately." "That's what I wanted to talk to you about," I said, closing my laptop. "I need your honest assessment of the company's financial situation." Diane looked down at her hands, then back up at me. "How honest are we talking here?" "Completely. No filters, no worrying about loyalty to my father. I need the truth." She took a deep breath. "We've been insolvent for at least 18 months. Your father and Nathan have been shuffling money around to keep up appearances. But there's nothing left. The Monroe project was just the final blow to an already sinking ship." I nodded, her confirmation matching my own conclusions. "When did you realize how bad it was?" "About 2 years ago. I tried to warn them. Showed your father the projections," suggested cutting back, restructuring while we still had options. She shook her head. "He didn't want to hear it. Said I didn't understand the big picture, that Nathan had a plan to turn things around." "And the staff? Do they know?" "Most suspect something's wrong. Vendors not getting paid, projects delayed. Rumors about the bank audits. People are updating their resumes, Jacob. They can feel the ship going down." I made more notes, the picture becoming increasingly clear. "Thank you for being candid. It helps." After Diane, I spoke with Jim from operations, whose assessment was equally grim. Projects half completed, contractors threatening legal action, equipment repossessed from job sites. The company wasn't just failing financially, its reputation in the industry was collapsing as well. By late afternoon, I had compiled a comprehensive analysis. I texted Nathan that I was finished, and within 20 minutes he returned looking anxious. "Well?" he asked, hovering near the door. "What's the verdict?" I closed the last file. "We need to talk, not just you and me, Dad, Mom, Olivia, everyone. Tomorrow, if possible." His face fell. "That bad?" "Worse," I replied honestly, "and more complicated than just throwing money at the problem." Nathan sank into a chair, suddenly looking defeated. "He's going to lose everything, isn't he? The business, the house, his reputation in this town." For a brief moment, I glimpsed something unfamiliar in my brother. Genuine vulnerability, free from the competitive edge that had characterized our relationship since childhood. In that moment, I recognized that Nathan was grieving. Not just for the family business, but for our father's legacy and his own expected inheritance of that mantle. "I don't know yet," I said, tempering honesty with a small measure of kindness. "That's what we need to discuss." When I arrived home that evening, Rebecca was waiting with a glass of wine and an understanding smile. Our apartment felt like a sanctuary after the day spent excavating the ruins of my family's business. "That bad?" she asked, echoing Nathan's question from earlier. I nodded, taking a grateful sip of wine. "Financial mismanagement, questionable accounting, high-risk investments with no safety net. They've been hiding the truth from themselves as much as from everyone else." Rebecca curled up beside me on our couch. "And now they want you to bail them out." $2 million wouldn't even scratch the surface," I said. "They'd need 5 times that to have any chance of real recovery, and even then, the structural problems would remain." "So, what are you thinking?" I stared out at the city lights. "I'm thinking about what Dr. Chen said in our last session, about how sometimes helping people means not giving them what they ask for, but what they actually need." Rebecca nodded. After years of therapy working through my family issues, Dr. Chen had become something of a guiding voice for both of us. And what do they actually need? A reality check. A controlled landing rather than a crash. And maybe a chance to see me clearly for the first time. And what do you need, Jacob? Rebecca asked softly. The question caught me off guard. Throughout this crisis, I'd been thinking primarily about my family's needs, their expectations, their requests. Even in my resistance, I had been reacting to them rather than considering my own needs. I need to stop seeking validation from people who don't know how to give it, I said finally. I need to make decisions based on what's right, not on what might finally earn me a seat at the table. She squeezed my hand. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. I spent hours that night drafting a presentation, not unlike those I prepared for. Horizon Tech board meetings, but with far more personal stakes. By morning, I had a clear plan, one that offered a path forward, but required painful concessions and, most significantly, a complete restructuring of the family power dynamic. My parents' house looked smaller somehow as we pulled up Sunday afternoon. Perhaps it was seeing it through the lens of financial reality, rather than childhood memory. Not the grand family estate, but a leveraged asset that soon might not belong to them at all. The formal living room had been transformed into a makeshift conference room, dining chairs arranged around the coffee table. My father sat in his usual armchair, my mother perched beside him on the arm like a sentinel. Nathan paced by the fireplace, while Olivia and Robert occupied the sofa. The tension in the room was palpable. Rebecca and I took the remaining seats as all eyes turned expectantly toward me. In that moment, I felt the weight of their hopes and fears, their desperate need for a miracle I wasn't sure I could, or should, provide. Thank you all for coming, I began, opening my laptop. After reviewing the company's finances and speaking with key personnel, I've developed an analysis of the situation and some potential options moving forward. Just tell us if you can help, my father interrupted, his impatience a thin mask for fear. I'm trying to, I replied steadily. But first, we all need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. I turned my laptop screen toward them, displaying the first slide of my presentation, Mitchell Family Enterprises' Current Financial Reality. And with that, I began dismantling the illusions that had sustained my family for years, not just about their business, but about our relationships and the unspoken hierarchies that had shaped my entire life. For perhaps the first time, they had no choice but to truly listen to the forgotten child. Insolvent for 18 months? My father's voice rose, his face flushing with a combination of anger and embarrassment. That's impossible. Nathan and I have been monitoring the financials closely. I clicked to the next slide, displaying a graph that charted the company's declining cash reserves against mounting debt obligations. The numbers don't lie, Dad. Mitchell Family Enterprises has been operating in the red since early last year, with temporary cash infusions masking the underlying problems. What cash infusions? My mother asked, looking from my father to Nathan, with growing concern. I hesitated, knowing this revelation would be particularly painful. Personal funds, Dad's retirement account, Nathan's children's college funds, home equity lines of credit on both their properties. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. The children's college funds? Nathan, you promised those were untouchable. Nathan wouldn't meet her eyes. It was supposed to be temporary, just until the Monroe development started generating returns. Which was never going to happen, I continued, my voice carefully neutral, as I displayed the environmental impact report on the Monroe property. The wetlands issue wasn't a surprise that blindsided you. The preliminary survey flagged potential concerns 9 months ago. You chose to ignore them and proceed with investment. Anyway, the room fell silent as this sank in. My father stared at the floor, while Nathan's pacing became more agitated. Why are you doing this? Olivia spoke up, her voice tight with anger. "We asked for help, not a public flogging." "Because the first step to fixing a problem is understanding its true nature," I replied evenly. "And right now, you're all operating under dangerous illusions about both the severity of the situation and the potential solutions." I clicked to the next slide. Current exposure. The numbers were stark. $9.7 million in total debt, with only $1.2 million in realizable assets. "The $2 million you asked for wouldn't save the business," I explained. "At best, it would delay the inevitable by a few months while burning through my savings." "So you're saying there's no hope?" my father said flatly, looking suddenly older than his 67 years. "You won't help us." "I didn't say that," I corrected him. "I said throwing money at the current structure won't help, but there are options." I switched to a slide titled Potential Pathways Forward, outlining 3 possible approaches. Nathan leaned forward, his expression shifting from defensive to cautiously interested as he scanned the bulleted points. "Option 1, I began, is a structured bankruptcy. We negotiate with creditors proactively, liquidate assets in an orderly fashion, and minimize personal liability." "Bankruptcy," my father repeated, the word clearly painful for him to even say. "The end of everything I've built." "Option 2, I continued, is a partial restructuring. I provide capital, not $2 million, but $500,000, to satisfy the most pressing creditors. We dramatically downsize operations, focusing only on the profitable service and maintenance division, and wind down the development side of the business." Nathan nodded slowly. "That might be workable. Maintenance has always been steady, even when new construction slowed." "Option 3 is the most ambitious," I said, clicking to the final detailed slide. "Complete reorganization under a new, corporate entity. The Mitchell name stays, but the business model changes entirely." I outlined my vision, leveraging my father's decades of construction relationships and Nathan's project management skills to pivot from direct construction to a consultancy and project management firm. Lower overhead, minimal capital requirements, focus on expertise rather than equipment and labor. Under this model, I would invest $750,000 as operating capital and join as an equal partner, bringing my financial and tech background to modernize operations. We'd start small, rebuild the reputation incrementally, and potentially create something sustainable for the next generation. The silence that followed was weighted with surprise. They had expected a yes or no on their funding request, not a comprehensive analysis, and certainly not a proposal that included me as an equal stakeholder in a family business that had always excluded me. Robert, Olivia's husband, who had been silent until now, was the first to respond. "This is impressive, Jacob. Very thorough." "What happens to the house?" my mother asked quietly. "Our home?" It was the question I had been dreading. "Under all scenarios, you'll need to downsize. The mortgage and equity lines mean there's virtually no remaining value in the property. But," I added as I saw her face fall, "I've researched some options there too." I hadn't included this in my formal presentation, knowing it was more personal than business. "There's a townhouse development on Willow Street, walking distance to downtown, single-level living, within your price range after liquidating other assets. 3 units are available immediately." My mother looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, surprise perhaps, that I had considered the personal implications of their financial collapse, not just the business angles. For a moment, I glimpsed what might have been gratitude in her eyes before she looked away. "This is a lot to absorb," my father said finally. "You're essentially saying the business as we've known it is finished, regardless of what we choose." "The business as you've known it has been finished for over a year," I replied, softening my tone. "You just haven't accepted it yet. What I'm offering is a chance at something new, smaller, more sustainable, but still carrying the Mitchell legacy forward. With you in the driver's seat, Nathan said, an edge returning to his voice. Not in the driver's seat, I corrected. As an equal partner. Equal say, equal risk, equal reward. My father stood abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the large backyard where he had once coached Nathan's little league teams while I watched from the sidelines, never quite coordinated enough to earn his athletic approval. You know what the hardest part of this is? He said without turning around. Not the money, not even losing the business. It's that you, the son I never quite understood, the one who always seemed to march to a different drummer, you're the one seeing things clearly while Nathan and I were blinded by, what? Pride? Desperation? The room fell silent at this unexpected moment of vulnerability from my father. I exchanged a glance with Rebecca, who gave me an encouraging nod. It's not about seeing things clearly, I said carefully. It's about perspective. I have distance that you and Nathan don't. The business isn't my identity the way it is for both of you. My father turned, his expression uncharacteristically open. And yet, here you are, offering to tie your future to ours despite having a successful career of your own. Why? It was the question I had been asking myself ever since formulating these options. Why put my own financial security at risk for a family that had relegated me to the sidelines for decades? Why not simply walk away, let them face the consequences of their decisions without me? Because despite everything, I said slowly, we're family, and maybe it's time we actually acted like one, with mutual respect and equal standing. My words hung in the air, the unspoken history of card tables and overlooked achievements, of subtle exclusions and not-so-subtle preferences hovering between us. I need time to think, my father said finally. We all do. I understand, I replied, closing my laptop. But the bank won't wait forever. We have a 2-week window at most to present them with a plan before they escalate their collection efforts. Nathan ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I recognized from childhood. 2 weeks to decide the fate of a 40-year-old business and our family's future. 2 weeks to accept reality and make the best of it, I corrected gently. As we prepared to leave, Olivia approached me, her expression uncharacteristically hesitant. Jacob, Robert and I have been talking. If you go with option 3, the reorganization, we might be able to contribute. Not much, but something. The offer surprised me. Olivia had always been the first to excuse herself from family financial obligations, her husband's wealth providing a convenient buffer from the Mitchell family's more mundane concerns. Thank you, I said sincerely. That would help, but I need to know everyone's fully committed to a new approach, not just financially, but in how we operate. Equal partners means equal respect. She had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I know we haven't always, the family hasn't always made me feel included, I finished for her. No, you haven't. The question is whether that can change. In the car driving home, Rebecca was uncharacteristically quiet, processing everything she had witnessed. Finally, as we crossed the bridge back into the city, she asked, "Do you think they'll take option 3? I considered the question. Dad will. His pride is wounded, but he's practical enough to see it's the best chance to salvage something of his legacy. Nathan's the wild card. He's always seen the business as his birthright, not something to be shared, especially with me. And if they choose one of the other options, then I'll help them through an orderly wind-down and move on with my life," I said with more certainty than I felt. I've made my offer. The choice is theirs. Rebecca reached over and squeezed my hand. Whatever happens, you've done something remarkable today. You stood in that room as their equal, maybe even their superior, and you still treated them with compassion. Her words warmed something in me, a recognition that regardless of my family's decision, I had already achieved a personal victory. I had faced them not as the forgotten child desperately seeking approval, but as a confident adult offering help on my own terms. The following days passed in a strange limbo. I returned to work at Horizon Tech, focusing on our upcoming product launch while waiting for my family's decision. My phone remained conspicuously silent. No calls from my mother checking in, no texts from Nathan with follow-up questions. The silence was telling in its own way, a reflection of the seismic shift in our family's power dynamics. On Thursday afternoon, just as I was wrapping up a meeting, my assistant notified me that my father was in the reception area, asking to see me. I found him standing awkwardly in the gleaming lobby of Horizon Tech, looking distinctly out of place among the sleek modern furnishings and young professionals hurrying past. His weathered construction company jacket seemed like a relic from another era against the backdrop of glass and polished concrete. "Dad," I said, genuinely surprised. In 37 years, he had never once visited any of my workplaces. "We could have met somewhere more convenient for you." He shook his head. "I wanted to see it, where you work, what you've built for yourself." His eyes took in the expansive space, the subtle indicators of success and innovation that defined Horizon Tech. "Impressive." "Thank you," I said, uncertain how to respond to this unexpected interest. "Would you like a tour?" "Maybe another time." "I came to talk about your proposal." My pulse quickened slightly. "Let's use a conference room." I led him to a small meeting space with a view of the city, closing the door for privacy. He settled into a chair, looking around with what seemed like genuine curiosity. "So this is where you make the big decisions." "Some of them," I acknowledged, taking the seat across from him. "Have you and the family reached a decision about the business?" My father nodded slowly. "We want to go with option 3, the reorganization." He met my eyes directly. "With you as an equal partner." Relief and surprise mingled in my chest. "Nathan agreed to this?" "Eventually," my father said with a hint of a smile. "It wasn't easy for him, or for me, if I'm being honest. Accepting that we need help, your help specifically, goes against everything He paused, reconsidering his words. "Everything I thought I knew about building a business, about being a provider." "It's not a failure to adapt," I said carefully. "It takes courage to change course when necessary." He nodded, his eyes moving to the view of the city beyond the windows. "Your mother found a townhouse on Willow Street that she likes. Says it'll be easier to manage as we get older. No stairs." The casual way he mentioned their downsizing, without bitterness or blame, suggested he had truly accepted the reality of their situation. It was a vulnerability I had rarely witnessed in my father, and it shifted something in my perception of him, from the invincible patriarch who had dominated my childhood to a man facing his own limitations with quiet dignity. "There's something else," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket and withdrawing a small box. "I want you to have this." He slid it across the table toward me. I opened it to find his watch, a Rolex he had purchased for himself when Mitchell Family Enterprises landed its first major commercial contract. He had worn it every day for as long as I could remember, a symbol of his success and status. "Dad, I can't take this," I said, genuinely startled by the gesture. "Yes, you can," he insisted. "I gave Nathan the company truck on his 18th birthday. Olivia got your grandmother's jewelry when she graduated college. You never got anything comparable. I told myself it was because you were on a different path, that material symbols wouldn't matter to you." He shook his head slightly. "But that wasn't it. The truth is, I didn't see you clearly. Not until now." The watch gleamed in its box, representing not just a valuable object, but a tangible acknowledgement of my place in the family. Belatedly given, but perhaps more meaningful for the journey that had preceded it. "Thank you," I said simply, closing the box. As my father stood to leave, he paused, looking suddenly uncertain. "Your mother's planning a family dinner on Sunday to discuss next steps. She said to tell you. He cleared his throat. She said to tell you there won't be any card tables. With those words, he extended his hand formally, as if to seal our new business arrangement. But when I stood to shake it, he pulled me into an awkward but genuine embrace, the first I could remember, receiving from him since early childhood. After he left, I remained in the conference room, processing what had just occurred. The watchbox sat on the table before me, a token of recognition 40 years in the making. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "How did it go?" I typed back. "They accepted option 3, and Dad gave me his watch." Her response came quickly. "The Rolex? The one he never takes off?" "Yes," I replied, still processing the significance myself. "And apparently Sunday dinner won't include any card tables." As I slipped the watch onto my wrist, adjusting the band to fit, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought us here, from forgotten child to financial savior to equal partner. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Rebuilding the business would require hard work, compromise, and a fundamental reshaping of our family dynamics. But for the first time, I would be sitting at the main table, not because they needed my money, but because they had finally recognized what I had known all along, that I deserved to be there. Sunday dinner at my parents' house had followed the same script for decades. My mother would spend hours preparing a meal that catered primarily to my father's and Nathan's preferences. Olivia would arrive fashionably late, instantly commanding, attention with updates about her children or her husband's latest accomplishments. My father would preside at the head of the table, with Nathan to his right, his position as heir apparent physically manifested in the seating arrangement. My mother would occupy the other end, with Olivia beside her, and I would be at the card table, positioned just far enough from the main table to make participation in family conversations awkward but not impossible, a physical reminder of my peripheral status in the family hierarchy. But this Sunday was different. Rebecca and I arrived precisely at 6, the time specified in my mother's unusually formal text invitation. The driveway already held Nathan's SUV and Olivia's luxury sedan. The house looked the same from the outside, but I knew everything inside had changed, not just the impending downsizing, but the fundamental dynamics that had defined our family, relationships for a lifetime. My mother answered the door wearing an outfit I hadn't seen before, not one of her usual dinner hostess ensembles, but something newer, more contemporary. "Jacob? Rebecca?" She greeted us with a warmth that seemed practiced but genuine. "Thank you for coming." The formality of her welcome was jarring, as if we were valued guests rather than family members whose presence was expected and whose contributions were typically overlooked. She led us through to the dining room, where the transformation became even more apparent. The table was set with the good china, the set typically reserved for Nathan's birthday celebrations and Olivia's children's special occasions. But more striking was the absence of the card table that had been my designated spot for as long as I could remember. Instead, the main table had been extended to its full length, with place cards marking each person's seat. My father stood as we entered, straightening his tie in a gesture of uncharacteristic nervousness. "Jacob." He nodded, his eyes briefly noting his watch on my wrist with a flicker of something that might have been pride. "Rebecca, glad you could make it." Nathan was by the sideboard, fixing drinks. "What can I get you?" he asked, the question directed at both of us equally. Another small but significant departure from the norm, where Rebecca's preferences had often been an afterthought. "Scotch, neat," I replied. "Rebecca?" "White wine, if you have it," she said, her hand resting supportively on my arm, sensing the tension beneath the surface civility. Olivia approached with Robert in tow, her usual air of superiority tempered slightly. "Jacob," she acknowledged, then surprised me with a brief hug. "That proposal you put together was impressive. Robert can't stop talking about it. Robert nodded enthusiastically. I've mentioned it to a few colleagues in commercial real estate. There's definitely a market for the kind of consultancy model you outlined. I thanked them, still adjusting to this new reality where my professional opinion was not just acknowledged, but actively valued. Nathan handed around drinks as my mother announced dinner would be ready in 15 minutes. I thought we could use the time to discuss next steps for Mitchell Consulting Group, my father said, using the new name we had agreed upon for the reorganized business. Jacob, since this was your vision, perhaps you could lead the discussion? I nearly choked on my scotch. In all the family gatherings of my adult life, I had never once been invited to lead anything more significant than a toast, and even those had often been interrupted or overshadowed. Of course, I managed, setting down my glass and smoothly transitioning into the role they had suddenly allocated to me. I've drafted a timeline for the reorganization, starting with formal incorporation next week. For the next several minutes, I outlined the process ahead of us, the legal structure of the new entity, the division of responsibilities, the target markets we would pursue first. Nathan asked surprisingly insightful questions about client transition, while my father nodded along, occasionally making notes on a small pad he had brought to the table. What about the Monroe property? Olivia asked. Is there any way to salvage that investment? I've been exploring options, I replied. There's potential to partner with a conservation group to develop a portion while preserving the protected wetlands. It won't recoup the full investment, but it could mitigate some of the losses and generate positive PR for the new company. My father raised his eyebrows. You've been working on this already? I made a few calls, I acknowledged. Nothing binding, just exploring possibilities. We'd make any decisions together, as equal partners. Equal partners. The phrase still seemed to catch in my father's throat, a concept so foreign to his understanding of family and business hierarchy that it required conscious effort to accept. But to his credit, he nodded. Good thinking. We should pursue that. My mother appeared in the doorway. Dinner's ready. Everyone, please find your seats. The place cards arranged us in a configuration I had never experienced before. My father at one end of the table, my mother at the other, with Nathan and Olivia on one side, Rebecca and me on the other. No head of the table adjacent to the patriarch, no physical manifestation of the family pecking order, just a balanced arrangement that suggested equality rather than hierarchy. As we settled into our places, my mother disappeared briefly into the kitchen, returning with a dish I immediately recognized, coq au vin, my favorite meal that she had rarely prepared because my father preferred simpler fare. The subtle acknowledgement that my preferences mattered too was not lost on me. This looks delicious, Mom, I said, the familiar childhood term of endearment slipping out naturally despite the formal atmosphere. She smiled, a genuine expression that softened the careful mask she typically wore at family gatherings. I remembered it was your favorite, from that trip to France we took when you graduated high school. The fact that she had retained this detail, from a trip 15 years ago that had rarely been mentioned since, surprised me. Perhaps I hadn't been as completely overlooked as I had always believed. Perhaps there had been moments of seeing, of acknowledging, that simply hadn't been expressed in ways I could recognize. As dinner progressed, the conversation flowed with a different rhythm than our usual family gatherings. Nathan didn't dominate, with stories of his business triumphs. Olivia didn't redirect every topic toward her children's accomplishments. My father didn't issue proclamations that went unchallenged. Instead, there was a genuine exchange of ideas, with each person's contributions given space and consideration. When the topic turned to my parents' upcoming move, my mother's composure wavered slightly. We've put a deposit on the Willow Street townhouse, she said, her voice carrying a hint of the grief she clearly felt about leaving the family home. It's lovely, but of course, it will take time to adjust. We'll need to downsize considerably, my father added. 4 decades of accumulation doesn't fit into a space half the size. Rebecca and I would be happy to help with sorting and packing, I offered. And our storage unit has extra space if there are things you want to keep but don't have room for. Immediately, my mother looked at me with surprise. That's very generous, Jacob. It's what family does, I said simply, the words carrying more meaning than the mundane offer of storage space might suggest. We help each other through transitions. A subtle tension seemed to leave her shoulders at my words, perhaps relief, that despite years of being relegated to the periphery, I was still willing to step up during their time of need. Not just financially, but with practical and emotional support as well. After dinner, as we moved to the living room for coffee, Nathan pulled me aside. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice low enough that the others couldn't hear. "For what?" "Specifically?" I asked, not unkindly but unwilling to let him off with a general, blanket acknowledgement of past wrongs. He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the directness of my question. "For taking your position in the business for granted. For never questioning why Dad automatically gave me the VP role without considering you. For—" he paused, searching for words. "For the card table, all those years. I knew it bothered you, but I never said anything." His admission, particularly about the card table, caught me off guard. I had always assumed my family was oblivious to the symbolism of my separate seating, that they genuinely didn't register the physical manifestation of my outsider status. "You knew?" I couldn't keep the surprise from my voice. Nathan nodded, unable to meet my eyes. "It started when we were kids, but by the time we were adults, yeah, I knew what it meant. And I let it continue because it was easier than questioning the status quo. The acknowledgement was both validating and painful. Confirmation that the exclusion I had felt wasn't merely in my head, but a real dynamic that others had recognized and allowed to persist. "I appreciate the apology," I said after a moment. "Moving forward will require all of us to establish new patterns. Equal partnership means equal respect, in business and in family." "I understand," he said, and for perhaps the first time, I believed that he did. When we rejoined the others, my father was showing Rebecca old family photos, including several of me that I had never seen displayed before. Pages from my high school science fair, a candid shot from my college graduation, a newspaper clipping about a tech competition I had won in my early 20s. "I kept everything," my mother explained, noticing my surprise. "In albums in the study. I always meant to put together a proper display, but—" She trailed off, the unspoken truth hanging between us. That celebrating my achievements had simply never been a priority, not because they weren't preserved, but because they weren't centered in the family narrative. As the evening drew to a close, Olivia approached with an envelope. "Robert and I want to contribute to the new venture," she said, handing it to me rather than to our father, another small but significant shift in the family dynamic. "It's not much compared to what you're investing, but we wanted to be part of rebuilding the family legacy." I opened the envelope to find a check for $50,000, a meaningful contribution that represented more than just financial support. It was Olivia's acknowledgement that she too had been complicit in the family patterns and was now making a concrete gesture toward change. "Thank you," I said, genuinely moved by the gesture. "This will help with the initial marketing push we discussed." By the time Rebecca and I prepared to leave, the atmosphere had transformed from the stilted formality of our arrival to something I had rarely experienced with my family: genuine warmth and connection, without the undercurrents of hierarchy and exclusion that had defined our interactions for decades. At the door, my mother surprised me with a hug, not the perfunctory embrace of obligatory family affection, but a genuine connection. "Thank you," she whispered, "not just for the business help, but for giving us another chance." On the drive home, Rebecca was quiet, processing the unexpected evolution of the evening. "That was not what I expected," she finally said as we neared our apartment. "Me neither," I admitted. I was prepared for resistance, for them to accept my help grudgingly while trying to maintain the old patterns. "Not for—" I gestured vaguely, struggling to articulate the shift I had witnessed. "Not for actual change," Rebecca supplied. "Not for genuine acknowledgement of your value." "It's still early," I cautioned. "One dinner doesn't erase decades of patterns. We'll see how things evolve once the reality of the new business structure sets in, once the novelty of their financial dependence on me wears off." "True," she acknowledged. "But did you see your father's face when Robert praised your business model? Or your mother's when you offered to help with the move? I think this might be real, Jacob. I think they finally see you." I absently touched my father's watch on my wrist, the weight of it still unfamiliar. "Maybe they do. Or maybe they're starting to." 6 months later, Mitchell Consulting Group had established itself as a boutique firm specializing in construction project management for sustainable development. My father, Nathan, and I settled into a working relationship that, while not without occasional tensions, functioned on a foundation of mutual respect that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. My parents had adjusted to their townhouse, with surprising grace, my mother discovering a talent for small space design that gave her a new creative outlet. My father, relieved of the crushing burden of a failing business, found time for long-neglected hobbies and began mentoring young contractors through a community college program. Family dinners continued, rotating between our homes, sometimes at Olivia's spacious house, sometimes at my parents' new place, and occasionally at the apartment Rebecca and I still maintained despite increasing pressure from my mother to find a proper house now that the business is doing well. The card table remained conspicuously absent from these gatherings. Instead, we gathered around whatever table our host provided, the seating arrangements fluid and egalitarian. The conversation flowed more naturally now, with space for each person's voice and interests. At a Sunday dinner celebrating the consulting firm's first major contract win, my father raised his glass in a toast. "To Mitchell Consulting Group," he began, his gaze meeting mine across the table. "And to second chances, in business and in family." As glasses clinked around the table, I felt Rebecca's hand squeeze mine beneath the tablecloth, a private acknowledgement of how far we had come from the day my phone exploded with desperate pleas for financial rescue. I had entered that crisis, as the forgotten child, relegated to the card table of family priorities. I emerged not just as a financial savior, but as an equal, a transition that required my family to change, yes, but that also demanded growth from me. I had to let go of old resentments, to stop seeking validation from people who had been conditioned not to provide it, to recognize that being valued by others begins with valuing yourself. The card table that had symbolized my exclusion for so many years was gone now, donated during my parents' downsizing. But its absence represented something more significant than a simple change in dining arrangements. It marked the dismantling of an unspoken family hierarchy, the beginning of a new dynamic built on mutual respect rather than assigned roles. I was no longer the forgotten child at every family dinner. I was simply Jacob, son, brother, business partner, equal. And in the end, that recognition mattered more than any financial rescue I could have provided. 2 years had passed since that fateful day when my family's desperate messages had flooded my phone. 2 years since their financial crisis had forced them to finally see me, not as an afterthought, but as someone essential to their survival. 2 years of rebuilding not just a business, but the fundamental relationships that defined our family. I stood at the podium in the downtown hotel ballroom, surveying the crowd gathered for Mitchell Consulting Group's second anniversary celebration. What had begun as a desperate attempt to salvage something from my father's collapsing business had evolved into a thriving enterprise that had exceeded even my most optimistic projections. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. I began, the confidence in my voice a far cry from the tentative tones I had once used in family gatherings, always half expecting to be interrupted or dismissed. 2 years ago, Mitchell Consulting Group was born out of necessity and vision, the necessity of adaptation, and the vision to see opportunity in what seemed like catastrophe. From my position at the front of the room, I could see my father seated at the main table, his posture more relaxed than I had ever seen it during his years as the head of the construction company. Beside him, my mother watched with unmistakable pride, not the reflected pride she had once taken in Nathan's achievements, but direct pride in the business I now led. Nathan sat nearby, engaged in conversation with one of our key clients. His initial resistance to our equal partnership had gradually given way to genuine collaboration, his project management expertise complementing my financial and technological background in ways that had proven unexpectedly harmonious. When we launched this company, I continued, many thought we were simply trying to save a family name, to preserve some vestige of a legacy built over 40 years. But what we've created is not merely a continuation, it's a transformation. Transformation. The word applied to more than just our business model. It described the fundamental shift in my family's dynamics, the renegotiation of relationships that had once seemed fixed and immutable. Successful transformation requires 2 key elements: the courage to release what no longer serves us, and the vision to build something better in its place. As I spoke, my eyes found Rebecca in the crowd. She smiled encouragingly, her presence a reminder of the unwavering support that had sustained me through the most challenging moments of this journey. Beside her sat Dr. Chen, my therapist who had become something of a family friend, invited to witness the culmination of a healing process she had helped facilitate. Mitchell Consulting Group represents not just professional expertise, but a philosophy that adaptation is strength, not weakness. That listening to diverse perspectives leads to better outcomes than clinging to hierarchical traditions. I paused, allowing the deeper meaning of my words to resonate with my family members, and that sometimes, the person you least expect to lead the way forward is exactly the one you need. After my speech, as guests mingled and celebrated, my father approached, resting a hand on my shoulder. The Rolex that had once been his prized possession still adorned my wrist, no longer a symbol of belated recognition, but simply a cherished connection between us. "Impressive turnout," he remarked, gesturing to the room full of clients, partners, and industry colleagues. "You've built something remarkable here, Jacob." "We built it," I corrected him gently. "All of us together." He nodded, a small smile lifting the corners of his mouth. "True enough. But it was your vision that saved us. I've never properly thanked you for that." "You don't need to thank me," I replied. "But you do need to take some credit. Adapting to a completely new business model at your stage of life wasn't easy. Most people would have just retired and tried to forget the whole thing." My father glanced across the room to where my mother was chatting animatedly with a group of clients. "Your mother wouldn't have allowed that," he chuckled. "She's more invested in this business than she ever was in the construction company. Says it's more interesting watching us solve problems with our minds than with bulldozers." This was true. My mother had undergone perhaps the most surprising transformation of all, emerging from her role as a passive supporter of my father's ambitions to become an active participant in our new venture. She had developed an unexpected talent for client relations, her social skills and emotional intelligence bringing a valuable dimension to our team. "Have you seen the latest projections?" Nathan joined us, tablet in hand. "Fourth quarter is looking even better than we anticipated. That healthcare system contract put us ahead of target." The easy way he shared this success with me, without competition, without the need to establish dominance, reflected how far our brotherly relationship had evolved. We would never have the easy camaraderie that some siblings enjoyed. Too much. History stood between us for that. But we had developed a mutual respect founded on genuine appreciation for each other's strengths. "Jacob, Olivia approached with her husband, Robert. "Sorry we missed your speech. The sitter was late." "No problem," I assured her. "How are the kids adjusting to the new school?" This simple exchange, Olivia apologizing rather than expecting, accommodation, me asking about her children with genuine interest, represented its own kind of transformation. The careful distance she had always maintained, the subtle ways she had reinforced my outsider status, had gradually given way to a more authentic connection. "They're thriving," she replied. "And Robert has news." Robert stepped forward with an excited expression. "I just got word from Westfield Development. They want to partner with Mitchell Consulting on the Riverfront project. It's a $20 million development." Nathan whistled low. "That would be our biggest project yet." And it came through Robert's connection, I acknowledged, ensuring credit was properly given. This is exactly the kind of collaboration we talked about when we restructured. As the evening progressed, I found myself in a quiet moment with Rebecca, watching my family interact with our business associates. "Did you ever imagine this 2 years ago?" she asked, slipping her arm through mine. I shook my head. "Never. I thought at best we might salvage something from the wreckage, establish some new boundaries. I never expected—" I gestured to the scene before us. "Complete transformation?" she suggested. "Something like that." Dr. Chen joined us, champagne flute in hand. "Congratulations, Jacob. This is quite an achievement." "Thank you for coming," I said sincerely. "And for everything leading up to this. I'm not sure I could have navigated it all without your guidance," she smiled. "You did the hard work. I just provided some perspective." "Speaking of perspective," Rebecca said, "have you told Jacob your news?" Dr. Chen's smile widened. "I've been invited to present a case study at the American Psychological Association conference next spring, a study on family system reorganization following financial crisis." I raised an eyebrow. "Our family?" "Anonymized, of course," she assured me. "But yes, your journey represents a fascinating example of how crisis can catalyze positive change in entrenched family dynamics. The idea that our story might help others, that the painful process of being relegated to the card table and then suddenly thrust into the role of financial savior might serve some greater purpose, added yet another dimension to our family's transformation. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, my parents prepared to leave for their townhouse, a home they had come to love for its simplicity and convenience, the downsizing that had once seemed like failure now embraced as liberation. "Before we go," my mother said, "we wanted to share something with you." She handed me an envelope. "We've been thinking about this for a while." Inside was a legal document transferring their remaining ownership shares in the family's original property, a small parcel of land outside town that had somehow escaped the bankruptcy, jointly to me, Nathan, and Olivia. "We want you three to decide what to do with it," my father explained, "together as equals." The significance wasn't lost on me. This wasn't just about property. It was about trust and recognition. Most importantly, it was about equality, the thing I had sought my entire life within my family. "Thank you," I said simply, knowing they understood the deeper meaning behind my words. After everyone had left and Rebecca and I were gathering our things, I found myself standing alone in the ballroom, reflecting on the journey of the past 2 years. The room where we had just celebrated our success had once hosted the same Chamber of Commerce dinners where my father and Nathan had been recognized repeatedly while I sat unacknowledged. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Forgot to mention Sunday dinner at our place this week. I'm making your favorite coq au vin again." Such a simple message, and yet it represented everything that had changed. Sunday dinner was no longer an obligation to be endured, a ritual of exclusion, marked by the symbolic card table. It had become what it should have always been, a gathering of equals, a celebration of family in all its complexity. Rebecca returned from the coat room, draping my jacket over my shoulders. Ready to go home? I nodded, tucking my phone away. Just thinking about how far we've come. From forgotten child to respected leader, she observed. Though I never forgot who you were, even when they didn't see it. We walked hand in hand through the hotel lobby toward the parking garage. You know what I realized tonight? I said as we reached our car. This was never really about the money. No? She raised an eyebrow. $2 million seemed pretty significant at the time. The money was just the catalyst, I explained. What I really wanted, what I've always wanted, was to be seen. To have my place at the table. To be valued not just for what I could provide in a crisis, but for who I am. Rebecca smiled, understanding as she always did. And now? Now I know that my value was never determined by their recognition of it, but it's nice that they finally see it too. As we drove home through the city streets, I reflected on the strange, painful, ultimately healing journey that had brought us to this point. My family's financial crisis had forced a reckoning none of us had been prepared for, challenging patterns and hierarchies that had seemed immutable. The forgotten child seated at the card table had become the leader at the head of a conference table, not because I had sought power over my family, but because circumstances had required me to step into a role they had never imagined for me. And in doing so, I had helped create a new family dynamic where card tables and hierarchies had no place, where each person's contributions were valued, where being different didn't mean being less. The next morning, I stood in our apartment preparing for work, absently adjusting my father's watch on my wrist. The timepiece had become such a natural part of my daily routine that I rarely thought about its significance anymore. Like my place in the family, it had transitioned from something I acutely missed to something I comfortably possessed. My phone buzzed with a group text from Nathan. Just got off the phone with Westfield. Meeting set for Tuesday to discuss riverfront project. Dad suggests breakfast at the office beforehand to align our approach. Jacob, we'll need your financial models. I replied with a simple, I'll be there, no longer surprised by the natural inclusion, the assumption of my essential role in our shared enterprise. As I headed out the door, I caught a glimpse of an old family photo Rebecca had framed years ago, one of the rare images where I wasn't positioned at the edge. In it, my younger self stood slightly apart from the others, not quite aligned with the family grouping, a subtle physical manifestation of my emotional distance. Beside it now stood a newer photo, taken at the consulting firm's first anniversary. Celebration. My parents, Nathan, Olivia and her family, Rebecca and me, all arranged in a natural semicircle, no visible hierarchy, no one centered or sidelined. Just a family, complex and imperfect, but fundamentally connected. From forgotten child to financial savior to equal partner. It had been a journey I never expected to make. The crisis that had once seemed like the ultimate confirmation of my peripheral status had instead become the catalyst for the recognition I had always sought. The card table was gone, physically and metaphorically. In its place was something I had always wanted, but never quite believed possible. A seat at the main table. Not grudgingly granted, not conditionally offered, but rightfully mine. And in the end, finding my place within my family had never been about the financial help I could provide. It had been about the recognition that I had always belonged there. If this story resonated with you, make sure to check out the 2 videos appearing on your screen right now. Your support means everything, so hit that subscribe button and notification bell to never miss an upload. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. In the comments below, have you ever gone from being overlooked to becoming essential in your family? Let's continue the conversation below.